I was going to post my usual slew of progress pics for my latest modeling project, this dragon, but I decided I would just do a short video tutorial. This is time-lapse, by the way. I don't sculpt this fast. I try to give people descriptions in my albums whenever I have a project going, but anyway, I just thought perhaps it might be better if I just did this little voiceover for you, kind of walk you through what we're looking at here on the screen. What I start out doing is you pull out a 3D sphere, a digital ball of clay, and then I start using various tools, like in this case the move tool, the move brush. They're all called brushes, this palette of brushes. This is a move brush, and it does just what you see me doing. It allows me to move the clay as if you're pinching it with your fingers into whatever looks like, hopefully, a dragon head in this case. I always start out with the head. That's usually the most interesting part of a dragon, for me anyway. So using various tools, like the standard brush here, I'm building up some basic forms. This is all freestyle, free. I've got enough dragons dancing around in my skull since childhood to really kind of have I would like to think, a pretty good handle on what a dragon is supposed to look like. And I just go completely intuitively with this, and that's the beautiful thing about ZBrush. I've said it in other tutorials I've made. That's the beauty of ZBrush, is it's so intuitive. It just allows you to freeform sculpt, and it's very much like real clay. I have to admit that I miss sometimes I miss the practical sculpting, hands-on sculpting, but this is, once you get the software, this is much cheaper, much less messy, and you get the same pleasure centers in the brain are activated using various techniques, both subtracting and adding. You can feel your way through what eventually will become a dragon. For my bodybuilding women, I'm always doing these female bodybuilders. The only human characters I'm interested in doing, by the way, usually are female bodybuilders, because muscles are fun to sculpt. So anyway, let me get to our little project that's in progress here. The dragon's head is starting to look pretty dragon heady, I believe is the technical term. And a lot of the time, initially, when I'm doing a project like this, I use almost exclusively the move brush, the original digital ball of clay, and then a standard brush, and I push the Alt key so I can, rather than adding clay to the model, I'm taking clay, I'm whittling clay out of. So alternating between plus and minus, I'm building or subtracting, adding or removing the necessary bits to put the nostril in there. Now I'm using the move tool again. You just kind of mosey along. As I said in the intro, this is time lapse. It's sped up by, I would have to guess, because you don't have the option of setting with ZBrush recording, at least not that I'm aware. I didn't see any options for the recording speed, but it looks to be about 10 to 15 times faster than I would normally sculpt, maybe 20 times. So here's what I'm using. I'm using a transpose tool. You see this line being drawn out. I'm just working on the shape of the head. Now I'm going to start to show you how I'm actually adding material to. It's called a mesh. A digital sculpture is always called a mesh, because when you look at it, when you take away the digital clay, you're left with only a wireframe mesh. So here I'm working on adding forms to the mesh. You can kind of see by looking at the video, I guess, what I'm actually doing. I feel like I'm taking the trouble to add a narration track, so I might as well narrate. Now, I always end up on my dragons. It just doesn't seem like a dragon unless you add a beak to it. So I added the starts of a beak. You look at the model from every angle. It's a 3D model, You can rotate it, look at it from every angle, and as you're working along, it's important that you rotate the model fairly frequently. Everything is undoable because it's clay. Nothing's permanent. Here I'm starting to add real loose. This is real loose geometry I'm adding to the model using extrusion. What I'm doing is, when you see me putting in these textures, for example, here around the eyes, I'm not really laying anything permanent in here. It's just that as I become a little more experienced with digital modeling, particularly in ZBrush, I find that if you add more noise to break up the clay looks a little flat. It's a little shiny. This seems to be there's several materials you can choose from. I use the blend material standard, which looks to me the most like clay, but there's a little sheen. All I'm doing is experimenting. Pretty much every time I do a sculpture, it's an experiment. There's a little boo-boo that I smoothed out. The reason I'm adding these textures, I'm building in general shape, but I'm also adding a little bit of texture. And the reason I'm adding the texture isn't necessarily to create anything permanent. I find that when you add noise or texture to the model, it helps you ascertain if you're heading in the right direction or not. Basically, it's just, like I said, it's a free-for-all. Now, when you add the texture in, you can start to see the way the light catches the high and low points of the model. The eye, obviously, to me, I felt needed to be the orbit around the eye. I needed to put in an area that suggested the eye socket. Now I'm starting to actually conform the eyelids around the eyeball. By the way, is a separate tool or a separate piece that I keep separate, because later when I'm ready to paint the model, it's really a lot easier to paint the eyes if they are separated from the model. So now I'm starting to turn my attention back to that beak, suggestive of a beak. I think dragons need to have beaks. They just don't look like dragons to me unless they have beaks. That's my personal taste. And then I'm using the transpose tool again. Whenever you see that line with the circles, which is gone now, it's difficult to keep up with what I'm watching here narratively. I'm creating more of a defined area between the beak and the snout or the muzzle. Just kind of feeling my way through what the beak's going to look like topographically speaking. Now, what you see here and what you'll ultimately see at this point in the video, when this video is done, you're going to see as far as I actually got, more or less, on the beginnings of this model. When I actually get into what I call the high frequency detailing, I make all kinds of amendments to the look of the model. I do all kinds of proportional change, like for example the tongue here. I wanted to give it more volume. I wanted to give it a little bit of texture. All of this, when you look at it as a whole, gives you an idea of the direction you need to go. And one of the things you can see when I'm texturing the tip of the tongue here, because I'm extruding so much clay, digital clay, every time you do an extrusion or you pull the piece out, like the tongue here, you lose geometry in that area. What that means is it's harder to sculpt, and you'll see that it starts to create facets. Rather than clean, smooth strokes, you'll start getting faceted strokes. Anyway, that's it. Maybe I'll do more. But this is right now the way the model looks as of the 1st of December, or the end of November 2018. I'm Eric Fournier. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.